So this is something that drummed up again in 91 from another New York Times article, right? About this October, to lead up towards book sales for Democrats.
So the New York Times is just playing their greatest hits right now?
Apparently. But there's new evidence. Ben Barnes finally comes out with a guilty conscience. It proves everything. So I want to get into discussing an article from the New York Times. Now, this is the web art. This is the Wayback Machine for the article. I'll share this with you guys if you want to look at this. Okay? But I saw this story and immediately I was like, this sounds like I read it. Okay, actually what I saw the story because I saw someone else post from like yesterday a video of Secular Talk talking about this, and he's just talking about how like Ronald Reagan's the most evil person ever, and this we should have known about this ever, and Ronald Reagan committed treason. So get your Ronald Reagans ready in chat, boys. It's about time to get your Ronald Reagans ready.
Ronald Reagan.
That's what I'm talking about. All right, there's going to be a lot of discussion of Ronald Reagan in tonight. So I saw this article in the New York Times titled "A 4-Decade Secret One Man's Story of Sabotaging Carter's Re-Election." Prominent Texas politician said he unwittingly took part in a 1980 tour of the Middle East with a clandestine agenda. This is a very, very, very old conspiracy theory. This has been a conspiracy theory on the left since Reagan took office. And it's a pretty believable one because, and it might even be true, right? It might even be true because I don't put it past Ronald Reagan to be a piece. I mean, look at Iran-Contra, right? Like, look at assassinating the Sandinistas. Look at him taking the Chicago school to, bring about, capitalism, right, to South America. Look at the way that, selling, the control over the Iraq-Iran war and funding, secretly using the CIA to fund Iraq and its invasion of Iran and rebel groups, and then using that money, and getting money to do, and doing the same thing in South America and illegal drug trades in South America to murder and kill communist regimes so that we can have like a more friendly South America. Like it's so much, right? So it is a very believable conspiracy theory. So I'll give you the conspiracy theory as it stands, and then we'll get and give you a little bit of background. The conspiracy theory is, and the short of it, right? And then we'll get into the slideshow. The conspiracy theory is that this is where October Surprise comes from. It was a book that was written in 1991, and the term October Surprise came from a lack of an October Surprise, right? Which is that the Carter administration would have, when they had the Iran hostage situation going on, if they would have been able to get it back before the election, they would have won the election. They would have had a giant October surprise. And instead, they didn't get that because Ronald Reagan secretly communicated with the Iranians from behind the scenes, saying that he would promise them a better deal than Jimmy Carter would give them. So don't release the hostages. We'll wait. And then once I'm president, you can release the hostages. Well, a day after the day that Ronald Reagan took office, the hostages were released. Right? And everyone was saying like, oh, Reagan was doing shady deals in the background and he made this happen and he committed treason to stop Jimmy Carter from winning the election. We'll go through that a little bit more, but that's kind of what this is basing. And so the New York Times just ran a story confirming, coming out and saying it's all true. It really happened. Okay? It really is true that Ronald Reagan committed treason to stop Jimmy Carter from winning the presidency. And if only Ronald Reagan hadn't committed treason, we would have had a Carter presidency. Democrats would have had a presidency. It would have been great. Well, let's go through it. So first, a little bit of backdrop. To really understand the situation, you have to understand the Iran hostage crisis, right? A little bit of historical background here. right? So in November 4th, 1979, right? The Muslim student followers of the Imam's line, that's a fucking mouthful in English. They invaded and captured the U.S. Embassy, and they took 52 Americans hostage. Okay? Now, 6 people were actually able to escape and remain in Iran for quite a while. They were on the run, hiding in Iran for quite a while. Okay?
That does not sound like an easy task.
So understand the backdrop for this, right? Is that you have to understand that in February of 1979, the Shah that we instilled to try and control Iran, right, was overthrown, and Ayatollah Khomeini was in charge of Iran at that point. But it was a weakened country for sure, right? There was a revolution. He was using secret police everywhere, trying to control what was going on. And these hostages, as I said before, reminds me of the story of the Vietnam War negotiations being delayed for a similar reason, allegedly. Yeah. Now, these hostages were kept for 444 days. Okay? They were hostages of the Iranian government for 444 days. They were let out the day that Ronald Reagan took office. Now, the Shah during this time was granted asylum in the U.S. for cancer treatment. So we installed him. They had hostages. He escapes and tries to get cancer treatment, and we gave him asylum. Now, eventually he ended up, I believe, in Egypt and died. Yeah, it was in Egypt, and he died in Egypt because he was granted asylum in Egypt as well. But if you're trying to negotiate American citizens and you're trying to get them back from a government, what you don't do is grant asylum to the guy that they overthrew that you installed, right? Like, it's not a real good negotiating tactic to get your hostages back. So, during this time, there was one successful operation that was a joint operation between the CIA and like the Canadians. And we were able to get those 6 people that, there's like a whole movie about it. I don't really know how true the movie is, but regardless, we were able to like come in with like pretending like to be other people and like get these people out. And it was a successful operation where we were able to get 6 Americans back. It isn't real. Stop pretending it is, right? Was it made in Hollywood? Fake. Yeah, I said I don't know how real it is. There's an assumption that much of it is fake, right? There was another operation, right? There was an attempt to rescue these people. It was using like two like one was an aircraft carrier and one was a different type of boat. I can't remember. That were already in Iranian waters patrolling, and Jimmy Carter and and his people they set up an operation known as Operation Eagle Claw. They were going to go in, bring in the SEALs and and bring in the troops and rescue these people. Yeah, it failed miserably. The helicopter crashed and 8 U.S. servicemen died and an Iranian civilian died. And we didn't even get anywhere near the people that were captured. So the guy resigned, right? So the Carter administration, the buck stops here. The Carter administration the whole way has horribly handled this situation, right? And of course, also he started funding and setting up deals with, the Taliban in Afghanistan, to fight the Russians, to try and pull media attention away from the fact that he was failing so miserably with the hostage negotiations. So you have problems about, the Middle East and the war in Afghanistan. Look no further than Jimmy Carter playing a big role in that. Jimmy Carter likes to pretend like, and people like to pretend like he was this peace diplomat. Like, no, he was a fucking warmonger like the rest of them. He was just bad. So, January 19th, the Algiers Accord with Algeria and Iran and the U.S. representatives, they sign an accord, right? This is mostly done by State Deputy Secretary of State Warren Christopher, right? they negotiate a treaty, and basically the treaty is like, the Shah's holdings have to be released to Iran, right? That we were like holding. We were ransoming like basically some of their money. We were supposed to drop sanctions, and then they were supposed to pay like certain like debts that they owed us as well, right? And so the money wise, it kind of equaled out, but Iran was going to give up their hostages, and we were going to like stop sanctioning them. That was basically the deal, right? With some money exchanges back and forth that are like kind of not that big of a deal. I mean, they are a big deal, but etc. But Reagan was on the fucking warpath, both during his election campaign as well as while he was waiting to take over the office of the presidency. One of the things that he's quoted as saying is he would refuse to pay ransom for people who have been kidnapped by barbarians. Like, there were plenty of times that he had said and hinted at, I will fucking bomb you out of existence if you don't give us our citizens back. And so the kind of one of the big things that made Reagan so popular, like in the beginning of his presidency, was the fact that we got these people back. And it was this idea of like strength, peace through strength kind of diplomacy. Is that the Iranians felt that they could fuck with Carter, but they didn't feel like they could play with Ronald Reagan. They felt like Ronald Reagan would bomb their asses. So they were like, well, we're going to give you your hostages back. And that's what was the real onus behind the Algiers Accord, right? According to a lot of different people. Not necessarily according to the New York Times and the conspiracy theorists. Okay? This weakening in this situation, once Ronald Reagan takes over, we didn't reduce the fucking sanctions. We just lied on treaties. He maintained sanctions. He funded rebel groups. There's the whole Iran-Contra situation. And the weakening that we did to destroy Iran and refuse to honor any of our agreements, eventually led to, Iraq, backed by us, but totally not backed by us, invading Iran in the Iran-Iraq War, or the Iraq-Iran War, as it's called. So there's kind of a backdrop of the situation. Okay? So here is the story according to the New York Times that was just published. Hey, Logan's Gaming, thank you. Here's the story according to the New York Times. Ben Barnes, right? Now, Ben Barnes is, a kind of protege to Connally, who was lieutenant governor. He was governor of Texas at one point. He was like the youngest Democrat Speaker of the House in Texas, right? He's kind of a protege and friends with John B. Connally, who had just lost a bid to Ronald Reagan in terms of the primaries. He just got primaried out, right? So these are the two main people involved in this story. Ben Barnes went on a tour of the Middle East to sabotage the re-election of Jimmy Carter. That is what he claims. Now, he doesn't actually have, that's what he believes is the motivation of the tour of the whole Middle East. Okay? John B. Connally Jr. wanted to stop Carter from getting the hostages and commit treason to help Reagan win the presidency to become Secretary of State or Defense. He was hoping after losing the primary that he could gain some like clout, some recognition, right? For like helping out Ronald Reagan by committing treason on Ronald Reagan's behalf to get the Iranians to hold the hostages so that Jimmy Carter didn't get the hostages back. So Barnes and Connally quote, and this is from the article, they went to one Middle Eastern capital after another that summer, meeting with a host of regional leaders to deliver a blunt message to be passed to Iran. Don't release the hostages before the election, Mr. Reagan. Mr. Reagan will win and give you a better deal. Okay? So they're going in Madrid, in Spain. They're going, in Iraq. They're going in Syria. They're going to Israel. And in the article, it says Israel is the only place that they went, as they went to the capital of basically every country in the Middle East and told all of the governments in the Middle East, whatever you do, pass this message on to Iran. Don't release the hostages. Okay? Then, when they returned back from their trip, Ben Barnes claims that they reported to William Casey, who was one of the people that was on Reagan's campaign and later became the CIA director. And according to the article and according to Ben Barnes, Connolly and them, they talked a bunch. Casey never explicitly states that like you were supposed to deliver this message, but he was very, very interested in talking about Iran and the hostage situation and things like that. And this was evidence to him that Connolly had been sent to the Middle East to deliver that message that was being to give to the Iranians. Okay? Mr. Barnes was also never part of congressional investigations. It's important to note that twice Democrat-controlled congressional investigations investigated Ronald Reagan for the October surprise kind of situation here, right? That he was negotiating with the Iranians to commit treason to withhold the hostages. And he's saying, well, I was never part of it, right? You know what I mean? And that just goes to show that the investigation wasn't a good investigation because I was with Connolly in these trips. Mr. Barnes now has a guilty conscience 40 years later because Jimmy Carter is in hospice and he's 98 years old, right? And he's dying. And, he doesn't want Jimmy Carter to go to the grave without at least somebody stepping forward and saying, yeah, we stole the presidency from you. You really should have been president. We committed treason on Ronald Reagan's behalf. Now, in order to confirm his story, this is reporting from the New York Times, all right? The bastion of good journalism. He told 4 people his story at some point in his life, and they confirmed that he did indeed tell them this story. Mark K. Updergrove, president of the Lyndon B. Johnson Foundation. Tom Johnson, a former aide to Lyndon Johnson, no relation, who later became publisher of the Los Angeles Times and president of CNN. Larry Temple, a former aide to Mr. Connolly and Lyndon B. Johnson. And H.W. Brands, a University of Texas historian.
3 of those sound real biased.
This is like the Kiwi cleanup when your VP just so happened to have his former company get the contract for the cleanup. Right? So this is all reporting to the New York Times, right? So now we got 5 people, right? Telling this story, which is that they're saying that they heard this story. They heard that we were told this story. Okay? Barnes is unaware if Reagan knew about the trip or if Casey told Connolly to make the trip. Who doesn't have any connection to Casey or to Ronald Reagan. Just Connolly, who may have been a rogue person acting on his own to commit treason all throughout the entire Middle East. John Connolly III, right, which is John Connolly Jr.'s son, went with his father to meet with Reagan about the trip and has no knowledge about the supposed message to Iran. They just talked about the trip to the Middle East and they talked about, geopolitics in the Middle East. When asked, Connolly III said, quote, "It doesn't sound like my dad." He added, "I can't challenge Ben's memory about it, but it's not consistent with my memory of the trip." Right? So kind of nothing there. But that was someone that is alive who was involved. The original story ran in April 1991, was published in the New York Times before releasing his book, October Surprise by Gary Sick, a former National Secretary aide to Carter. So this is something that drummed up again in 91 from another New York Times article, right? About this October, to lead up towards book sales for Democrats.
So the New York Times is just playing their greatest hits right now?
Apparently. But there's new evidence. Ben Barnes finally comes out with a guilty conscience. It proves everything. So, to be fair, right, some actual kind of piece of evidence. Investigations were missing information on the trip's dealings in Madrid, in which a later wire showed Connolly may have been in Madrid. So one of the reasons that this trip was dismissed when they were investigating Ronald Reagan, the Democrats, right, is that the itinerary of the supposed countries they went to didn't match. There was a ton of things that didn't match. This was one of many things that didn't match. But 20 years later, this thing did match, but there's still a bunch of other things that did match. But they chose to really highlight this, and their article is like, aha, see? But yeah, there was a ton of other shit that didn't match too. The article then, as like towards the end of the article, it's just a whole bunch of evidence proving that like Connolly and Barnes were like friends and worked together. It's kind of really, I don't know what the point of it is. It seems like someone was just getting paid by the word or something. Because like the bottom like quarter of the article, with the exception of like the last two paragraphs, it's just like they did this together and they did this together and this person was there together. But it's just establishing that they knew each other and hung out with each other. Yeah. Mr. Barnes, when asked why he didn't come forward earlier, he said, quote, "I don't want to look like Benedict Arnold to the Democrat Party by participating in this." He recalled explaining to a friend the headlines at the time he imagined would have been scandalous. I did not want that to be on my obituary at all. So he didn't want the other Democrats to think he was bad for coming out and proving that Ronald Reagan tried to steal the election and that he was unwittingly a part of that. As a lifelong Democrat. And like buried like into like paragraph 10, the New York Times admits that it might be problematic, but you know, for some reasons, but like he has no reason to lie about this. There's no reason to make this story up. They actually say that it's like counterintuitive because it's actually a risk for him to come out and say this now, that he was the victim of Ronald Reagan and Connolly's treason. And that why would he talk shit on a Republican as a lifelong Democrat? Hey, what's up? Yes, Casimir, he's a lifelong Democrat. I buried that a little bit. On purpose. So who is Ben Barnes? Ben Barnes is a lifelong Democrat politician who remained friends with Connolly, who switched parties. So during their entire political career together, they were Democrats. Then Connolly switched over to the Republican Party as many Southerners were switching over to the Republican Party, right? Ben Barnes, however, stayed a lifelong Democrat and Democrat supporter. He's the youngest Speaker of House in Texas and was Lieutenant Governor of Texas. He was the top fundraiser for John Kerry, raising over $500,000 in John Kerry's presidential campaign.
Impressive.
Hey, welcome, Seb Guev. You'll find that there's a lot of shit that you love about us and that we're based as fuck, and then you'll find some stuff that you probably don't because we're hardcore libertarians here. We're anarcho-capitalists. We tend to be on the right on most issues, especially like in the Twitch space where like it's all leftists. But yeah, stay a while, have some fun, and join the Discord if you want to meet everybody. We got like 500 people in the Discord, so plenty of interesting conversations there. So yes, this guy was the top fundraiser, for John Kerry. Yeah, this guy has no reason to like, you know, make Jimmy Carter look good and make Ronald Reagan look like an evil piece of shit that committed treason. As a Democrat and lieutenant governor from 1969 to 1973, his career basically ended after the Sharpstown scandal in 1971, which is to say that he was tied to but never proven to be directly involved with a bunch of Democrats in Texas that were stealing and embezzling money. It was never proven that he was a part of it, but like being like friends with all of those people, knowing all of those people, having dinner with all those people, having communications with all those people constantly over and over again. You know, it was all circumstantial evidence, but it basically killed his run to be able to really be able to have political aspirations. Despite the fact that Lyndon B. Johnson thought was stated as saying that he would definitely be the next Democrat president. He thought that that's who he was putting his money on. But this was before the Sharpstown scandal in 71. Right? You know, it only takes one bad scandal or something to just crash you forever. I mean, hell, what's his name? The anti-war guy that eventually became the head of the DNC. Fucking, can't remember his name right now.
Oh yeah, shit. I can't think of his name, but yeah.
What are my thoughts about Ronald Reagan? I think it's based to be against communism. I think that he was a piece of shit that forwarded the drug war, that was involved in Iran-Contra, that used the CIA to destabilize southern countries, and I think he handled most things pretty poorly. Not a big fan of Ronald Reagan. I think he's a pretty bad president. To be fair, though, Seb Guev, I think that about basically every president except for like Alvin Coolidge and
Is it Garfield or Cleveland?
Grover Cleveland. Like pretty much, I think every president is a piece of shit monster except for those two. He was a great leader, but he was a horrible human being. Like I think the crimes against humanity that he had are unmeasurable. The amount of blood that is on Ronald Reagan's hands is one of the worst for sure. Really know anything about Coolidge? Yeah, because Coolidge did nothing except he didn't commit any crimes. Sure, my guy. I barely know anything about Coolidge. Basically, Coolidge did nothing except when there was about to be.
He was known as the do-nothing president.
He was the do-nothing president. The only time he really did anything was when Congress started playing funny money games with the silver currency and almost started a crash. And then they wanted to like get involved more. And he told them to go fuck themselves, to stop doing what they're doing. And basically force them to force the market to correct itself. And then it did. That's the only thing Coolidge really ever did. Other than that, he basically did nothing as president. Yeah.
So, what is a W tax advisor?
Like a dub, like a win. Like he's saying his tax advisor was like, we need more government funding. And so
I thought it might have like a real meaning. Like W was like just a short term for like something and like tax structure shit.
No,
yeah.
So like his tax advisor basically understood Lochner's curve. And so he understood, unlike most people at the time, that if you reduce taxes, that you would have more economic interactions. And by having more economic interactions, we would raise tax revenue. And like he was like, well, I want more tax revenue, which is not good, obviously, because we're anarchists. But he did it by lowering taxes, same way Trump did. The problem is Trump also increased spending, so didn't help.
Didn't they pay off the debt that Coolidge came into office with? Or
I don't know.
Say?
I don't remember.
At the very least, he substantially reduced the U.S. debt.
Shit, Mark doesn't speak Zoomer, right? Because he's not on Twitter.
I know what dubs are, but like when you see it in text like that, and you're high as fuck, like throws you off for a second.
All right, fair enough. So, but yeah, the only president in modern history to like actually reduce the deficit was Bill Clinton. That's just because he was over the .com bubble. Most criticism I've heard about Ronald Reagan comes from leftists is that he lowered taxes for the rich because low taxes are bad. Yeah, no, I don't give a fuck about that. That's based. And like some of his tough rhetoric against the communists, pretty based, right? Though it is interesting, is that when Gorbachev met with Ronald Reagan, they both wrote in their memoirs later that it was their advisors that continued the Cold War. It was like, no, continue the Cold War. Like, don't, like the other person's not going to honor an agreement. Both of them like sat together and were like ready to end the Cold War, like earlier on. And like, then they went back to their advisors and they were like, hey, I think this guy's really serious about trying to stop this for the betterment of everybody. Like, this isn't working for their country. It's not working for our country. Like, we want peace. And then all their advisors were like, that Russian commie motherfucker's lying to you. Don't trust this snake's words. And then they were like, the Americans are lying to you. They're going to be fucking invading a country tomorrow. Which is not bad advice. Right. It's not, but it's funny that they both wrote in their memoirs that like, yeah, like we were going to stop. We had actually convinced each other that it was time to end it. And then our advisors both convinced us.
Kind of similar to World War I, and like England and Germany were about to come to peace talks, and it was like, oh shit, America's crashing the party.
Yeah, no, I'm well aware of the Iran-Contra scandal. I'm well aware of the fact that Ronald Reagan made Oliver North fall on his fucking sword because so that Reagan didn't have to go to fucking jail for intentionally assassinating democratically elected people. Like, look, I don't like communists, but like, you know, you never heard of the Iran-Contra scandal? Like, get out of here. You're just, Seb Guev, you're glowing like a motherfucker right now. This appears to be, this is a glowy. Calls him like I sees him, boy. We're going to continue. I know a glowy when I see one, boys. All right, so continuing on. So he's a top fundraiser. He's a top fundraiser for John Kerry. So totally a non-biased person that has no issues with Ronald Reagan, right? He then went into the real estate business with Connolly. Okay? And then that business failed because of like the oil boom in Texas didn't work out quite that well. And that business failed. So he was a failed real estate investor. And then he became a lobbyist and then founder of a business consulting firm and was a lobbyist for politicians and a business consulting firm that like helps people in the real estate market with like political connections. So totally clean, trustworthy, great guy.
Totally hasn't met any Russian dudes.
Right. So these are just a few of the things that are omitted. If you missed part of this section will go up on YouTube. So don't worry, we'll put it up on YouTube. I plan to put this up on YouTube. Or else I wouldn't have put in effort to make a fucking PowerPoint. I'm just saying. Also, I have to remember to stop saying the F word so much because it's going on YouTube. But regardless, so this guy, this totally trustworthy guy, you know, he worked with under Reagan and stuff. They failed to mention in the entire article that he's a lifelong Democrat. They failed to mention that this guy's skis that has worked in failed businesses and then became a lobbyist and then works in consulting firms, you know, rubbing hands with all of these DC politicians people. So what are some of the inconsistencies and issues within this? Yeah, God damn it. Your dog needs a new fucking diet, my guy. Your dog constantly farts on me now, like every fucking stream, and it's rancid.
I mean, he's got a little tummy trouble going on right now. Like, he's been eating a little bit of grass. Like, he'll be good soon.
All right.
Probably.
All right. So some inconsistencies. Well, the first thing that should be like really obvious is he waited 40 years. And in those 40 years, both Connolly and Casey are dead. So there's no one to corroborate, to like say this isn't true. They can't defend themselves now that they're dead. The other thing, Mr. Barnes has 0 documents, no receipts, no memos, no diary entries from the time, nothing. He has the only evidence that this one person has is that in the last 5 to 10 years, he's told 4 people, 3, which by the way is another bullet point, 3 of the 4 of them were friends or tied to Lyndon B. Johnson. Like these are all lefties.
You don't get it. His evidence is he's a good guy.
Right. He's the only source of this information. They try to make it seem like he has 5, that they have 5 sources, but it all stems from the word of one man. I do love that whoever this person is, pretending to be a right-winger, is now also just constantly saying Fabian Society over and over again, but they're also pretending to be a dumb right-winger, but they know what the Fabian Society is, but they're also not referencing it. Like you didn't build a strong enough character as you pretended to be somebody else. So, another problem with this story is that no state in the entirety of the Middle East has acknowledged this account with evidence. Presumably, they went to the Capitol and talked to the government of everyone in the Middle East. And none of them have come forward with any documents or evidence or even a high-level official saying, yeah, we were told to pass a message to Iran.
Let's be honest, with the way U.S. relations in that region have been since then, somebody would have come forward with that shit.
Right. We've bombed like half of these fucking countries. Right? Like the idea that none of them have come forward, that no government, no documents, no evidence, no recordings, nothing has come forward in that regard is insane. Lastly, it actually weakens the October surprise theory. It undermines the theory that they have, the conspiracy theory that has been going on for so long. And I'll explain. So, the October surprise theory, it is the only witnesses that they had were from arms dealers that were in the Middle East, right? Like black market arms dealers supposedly said that this was a thing in the book, The October Surprise, right? And the article from the New York Times says, and this isn't from shady arms dealers either, like in the October Surprise. So it makes fun of that. But the other problem is that the October Surprise theory hinges on the fact that Ronald Reagan's team was in contact with Iranian officials. You there, Mark?
Yep.
Yeah.
Just
So it it hinges upon the fact that they were in direct contact with the Iranian officials, and yet this entire new theory and new evidence, like you just checked out. I'm trying to get you to like talk with me.
I'm not
We got
checked out.
mods. We got mods. It's all right. We got mods in chat. We'll be all right. And so the October surprise theory now can't be true if Ben Barnes's account is true, because Ben Barnes's account is that there was no direct conversation, and that they had to pass messages from every other capital and country within the Middle East to the Iranians, and that somehow none of this information ever came out.
Yeah, there's too many like he made way too complicated of a story. You can tell this guy's not good at lying.
Real quick, just because it's clearly distracting people to have this glowy freaking out and cursing on repeat. Chill out for 10 minutes. We'll see you when you get back. So, last little bit. Why does this conspiracy theory exist? Like, why is this one that like keeps rearing its head? Well, of course, there is the term October surprise, right? That's kind of coined here, which makes it a very popular conspiracy theory. And the April 1991 book, had backing from the New York Times, is a New York Times bestseller, right? The author, put out his article on the New York Times first before the book came out, summarizing the book to entice people to buy the book. Source: I'm a lifelong Democrat. Yep. Also, the other reason is like Carter lost 44 states. And he lost the popular vote by 9.8 points. Right? Like this was a 60-40 split election. A massive majority, like the Ronald Reagan Carter election was essentially just demolished Jimmy Carter. And Jimmy Carter didn't just have problems with the multiple failed operations trying to get back these Iranian hostages and his completely disastrous foreign policy, but he also had some of the worst domestic policy that ever existed in American history. It was rampant inflation, gas prices were horrible, rampant unemployment, right? Like the country was crippled by the Carter administration.
Hey, but silver linings, we got right on red.
We did get right on red. And so, I thought this was an interesting story. I whipped this up to go over this hilarious New York Times conspiracy theory that is being peddled, and just pointing out the actual history and all of the inconsistencies within their story, and like why it's just a bad article. Thank you for watching. If you made it all the way through this video, then you've got to like, share, and subscribe. Over 70% of you watching aren't subscribed, and it really helps. We're live on Twitch every Monday through Thursday starting at 7 p.m. Eastern. And follow us on Twitter for more spicy libertarian takes. Finally, we all know that YouTube is a temporary place for dissidents. One day we'll upset the wrong journalists and be gone. Poof. But it doesn't have to be that way if you make sure to follow us on Rumble. Every video on YouTube is also posted to Rumble, and sometimes we exclusively stream there. Thank you for your time. All links are in the description below.